By the time the clock above the nurse's station slipped past midnight, the emergency department at Mile High General Hospital had the sour metallic smell of old coffee and dried blood. Emma Cole stood at the foot of a stretcher, 2 fingers resting gently on the inside of an old woman's wrist. The woman's eyes were wide glassy with fear. Monitors beeped in uneven rhythms, fluorescent lights hummed overhead. Ms. Alvarez. Emma said quietly, "Inhale through your nose. Slow, like we practiced." The woman's breaths came out ragged at first, then slowly matched the pace of Emma's fingers tapping against the bed rail. Inhale, tap, exhale, tap. A thin thread of calm settled into the room. On the wall-mounted television, the volume was turned low, but the images were sharp. Grainy footage of desert sand rotors spinning a Black Hawk, lifting off into orange twilight. A news ticker mentioned deployments and casualties. Emma's gaze flicked up for half a second. The soft thump of the helicopter blades, even through cheap speakers, tightened something high in her chest. Her thumb pressed a little harder against Ms. Alvarez's pulse. "You okay, honey?" the old woman whispered in Spanish-accented English. "I'm fine," Emma answered. Her voice stayed level. "You are too. Your heart rate is coming down." She reached for the remote, killed the sound completely, and slid the TV monitor off to a hospital logo screen. The rotors disappeared. Behind her at the station, 2 nurses leaned over a computer. "She never talks," one murmured, not quite low enough. "It's like she's stalking the halls." "She's useful," the other replied. "You tell her what to do, she does it. Human checklist." Emma did not turn. She finished charting Ms. Alvarez's vitals in neat, straight lines, then washed her hands and moved back toward the nurse's station. A stack of charts slammed down on the counter. "Cole," Dr. Randall Pike said, dropping his stethoscope around his neck like a medal. His white coat was still crisp 2 hours into a double. He looked fresh, almost smug. "Did you reorganize the tongue depressors by color again, or was alphabetizing them enough of a thrill for you tonight?" An intern snorted. The charge nurse looked away. Emma picked up the top chart without flinching. "I restocked them by size. The PEDS tray was low." Pike rolled his eyes. "Of course you did." He snapped on a pair of gloves and moved toward the next bed. The intern followed, mimicking his stride half a step behind. Emma watched just for a moment, then forced herself back to the monitor board. Next to a name in bed, 5, there was a scribbled note: "Anxiety attack, possible discharge." Her pen hovered over the board. A thin film of cold slid across her shoulders. 4 hours earlier, that same handwriting had sat above a different name. She could still see the woman's face in her mind. Mid-40s cheeks, flushed hands clawing at the sides of the stretcher as if she could peel away her own skin. Her breathing had been shallow and fast, but not chaotic. There had been a strange seesaw motion to her chest that did not match panic. Panic attack, Pike had said, flipping through labs without really looking. Normal EKG, normal troponin. She needs a prescription, not a bed. Emma had stood in the corner of the room, back almost touching the wall. The scent of cheap hand sanitizer hung heavy in the air. The room's only air vent pushed a thin draft across the patient's bare arms. Ms. Turner Pike had said in a brighter tone, "You are fine. Heart is good. You can follow up with your primary." The woman had tried to nod, but her throat had swelled mid-breath. Emma's eyes fixed on the hollow between the collarbones, on the way it dipped when she inhaled. The sound in the room dulled around her. Her fingers closed over the end of the bed, feeling the tremor in the metal frame with each breath the woman dragged in. Dr. Emma said. She heard her own voice quiet. "Her breathing pattern is off. I think this could be anaphylaxis." Pike did not bother to turn all the way. "Her airway is fine. She's talking." "Barely." The woman managed a broken syllable and then coughed a wet, strangled sound. Emma stepped closer. The woman's lips had taken on a faint gray-blue tone. The rash on her neck that had been muted earlier had bloomed angry and mottled. Dr. Emma said again, "I recommend epinephrine." Pike snapped the chart closed. "Cole, I said panic attack." He walked out of the room. The intern followed. The clock above the door ticked. Emma's own heartbeat doubled. She looked at the woman, at the way her fingers now scrabbled weakly at the sheets instead of gripping. "Ms. Turner," she said softly, "I'm going to help you breathe." Her feet moved before the thought finished. She crossed to the crash cart in the hall, pulled open the drawer, and grabbed an EpiPen. Plastic crinkled under her grip. Her hand shook once, then stilled as she uncapped the pen. Deep breaths, she murmured, more for herself than the patient, and drove the pen into the woman's thigh through the thin hospital blanket. The reaction came quick. Within half a minute, the woman's chest rose more easily. Color began to creep back into her face. The hitching, desperate sound at the back of her throat softened. Pike reappeared in the doorway just in time to see Emma holding the spent injector. His jaw clenched. "Did you authorize that?" he asked quietly. Emma stared at him. She was losing her airway. "That is not what I asked." He guided her out of the room with one hand, lips set in a thin line. The supply closet door clicked shut behind them. The light inside was too bright, reflecting off rows of saline bags and carefully labeled boxes. You do not touch a patient with a medication like that without my explicit order. His voice stayed low, but the anger in it was thick. You understand me, Cole. She would have coded, Emma answered. You know that. I know what the chart will say if she had. And I know what the chart will say if you keep pulling stunts like this. Next time you overstep, I will not bother with a write-up. You will be done here. He brushed past her to leave the smell of his expensive cologne lingering in the cramped space. The door opened, spilling the sounds of the ER back in and then closed again. Emma was left alone with the hum of the fluorescent bulb. Her hands were steady now. She looked down at them for a long moment, then curled them into loose fists at her sides. Hours later, her shift finally ended. The hallway seemed longer with the day staff filing in, jackets draped over one arm, coffee cups in the other. No one stopped her to say goodnight. Outside, Denver's night air bit at the back of her throat. The hospital's glass facade glowed behind her. She tugged her thin jacket tighter and started toward downtown shoes, slapping softly against wet concrete. The lantern sat on a corner of Larimer, its neon sign flickering red against the drizzle. The smell of grilled onions and spilled beer drifted out as she pushed the door open. Inside it was warm and dim. A game played silently on a mounted television above the bar, the captions marching across the screen. A group of men in pressed shirts and loosened ties occupied a table near the back, their empty glasses catching the light. Johnny Reyes, the bartender, wiped down the counter with a rag that had seen better days. He looked up, recognition softening his features. Hey, Emma, he said. Rough night. She slid onto a stool. Long, she answered. Water. Please. He filled a heavy glass with ice and water, slid it to her, and set a small bowl of pretzels nearby. She murmured a thank you. He nodded once and moved down the bar. For a few blessed seconds, the noise at the businessmen's table blurred into background sound. Emma let her shoulders drop. The condensation from the glass cooled her fingertips. Look at that, a voice from the back table cut through too loud. Hospital janitor's night out. There was laughter. Something in the tone tightened the skin along her spine. Nah, another voice added words, slurring. Too clean for janitor. Maybe she wipes beds or something. Definitely not a real nurse. Real nurses never shut up. Emma stared at the clear surface of her water. A distorted reflection of the neon sign trembled in the glass. Johnny glanced their way, jaw tightening, but Emma gave the slightest shake of her head without looking over. She did not want a scene. Not tonight. People like that? The first man continued, they freeze when things get ugly. Weak people should not be anywhere near medicine. The comment landed with a thud she felt under her ribs. Emma swallowed tasted metal at the back of her tongue. Her fingers tightened around the glass until the ice shifted and clinked. She slid a few bills from her pocket onto the counter, enough to cover the untouched pretzels in the water. Thanks, Johnny, she said. You sure? He asked quietly. You just got here. I'm good. She left the glass half full, hopped down from the stool, and walked toward the door. The laughter from the table followed her, thinner now, but still there. Walk it off, shadow girl, someone called. The bell above the door jingled as she stepped out into the wet air. The city lights smeared across the pavement. The smell of rain and exhaust wrapped around her. She shoved her hands into her jacket pockets. Her fingers brushed something hard and familiar in the inner lining edges worn smooth over years of handling. Plastic, cold, the corner of a card. Emma closed her hand around it without pulling it free and kept walking into the drizzle. Rain threaded down the collar of Emma's jacket and soaked into the back of her scrub top. The city felt blurred at the edges. Headlights smeared into white streaks on the wet pavement. A bus roared by its tires, slicing through a puddle and spraying cold water up her shins. Her hand stayed wrapped around the card in her pocket. She knew every ridge of it without looking. The shallow groove where a corner had snapped and been sanded smooth. The uneven edge where cloth had torn away with it. Plastic weightless and heavy at the same time. A siren wailed somewhere uptown, rising and falling against the low rush of traffic. She walked on, counting her steps without meaning to. 8 from the bar door to the crosswalk. 12 across the intersection. 16 more to the darkened storefront with the dusty mannequins. The rain shifted. What had been a steady trickle became a fine mist driven sideways. A subtle change in air pressure pressed against her eardrums like the inside of a plane 30 seconds after liftoff. Emma stopped. For a heartbeat, she thought it was her imagination. The busy hum of the city, the echo of the television from earlier, the rotor blades that had never quite left her mind. Then she heard it. A low thump from somewhere beyond the buildings. One beat, then another. A vibration more than a sound traveling up through the soles of her shoes. Helicopter. Her fingers clenched around the card. She told herself it was just police air support traffic patrol, anything ordinary. The rain began to spray from a different angle, kicked by gusts that did not match the weather. The next gust nearly shoved her sideways. Loose flyers tore themselves from streetlight poles and tumbled down the block. Trash lids rattled. A metal sandwich board outside a coffee shop tipped, clattered, and skidded into the gutter. The sound of the blades thickened into a full-body presence, a heavy pulse in the air. Windows rattled, car alarms hiccuped into life. A woman across the street yelped and dropped her umbrella as wind ripped it inside out. Emma looked up. Between two brick buildings, low clouds glowed from underneath, lit by a moving source. A shape pushed through the curtain of rain. At first it was just a shadow in the mist. Then the thunder of rotors shook the signage along the street, and the machine dropped into full view. The helicopter was dark, almost gunmetal, with matte panels that swallowed the streetlights. A refueling probe jutted forward like a spear. HH-60G stenciled near the nose. The side doors were sealed, two small figures visible in the windows hunched over equipment. The aircraft came low, too low. Street traffic screeched to a halt. Horns blared. Someone screamed. A man dove over the hood of his car, arms covering his head. The Pavehawk hovered just above the asphalt, its rotor wash turning puddles into spraying fans of water. The neon sign above the lantern wobbled, flickered from red to sickly pink, then snapped to black as the bulbs blew. Behind the bar's shattered front window, silhouettes jerked backward out of their chairs. Johnny's rag flew out of his hand, then vanished in the wind. The pilot flared the nose, settled the skids with a shudder onto the middle of Larimer Street, crushing a newspaper vending box under one side. The thump of contact vibrated through Emma's bones. She did not run. She could not move at all. The side door slid open. The interior of the helicopter glowed red, painting the rain in blood-colored streaks. Figures in helmets and tactical gear leaned out, clipped to lines, eyes hidden behind dark lenses. One of them dropped boots, hitting the wet pavement with a splash. Then another. They flowed outward in tight formation, weapons slung, hands up in signals, herding pedestrians to the sidewalk. Move it back, someone shouted. Clear the street, eyes front, phones down. No one listened to the last part. Phones were everywhere, lifted into the air, tiny screens reflecting the impossible scene. More of the team spilled out, 6 in total, their movements so synchronized it seemed rehearsed. At their center, a shorter figure in a heavier vest strode forward, head turning, scanning faces. The name tape over his chest was soaked but still legible. Santos. His gaze cut across the street through the broken window of the lantern, then back down the sidewalk. He lifted a gloved hand to the mic by his mouth. Ghost Rider. 2-1 on sight, he said. Voice hard and clear, even over the rotors. Larimer and 15th. Street is not secure. Initiating code. Black protocol. Be advised we are still hot. Repeat, we are still hot. We. Johnny had come to the doorway of the bar. Rain soaked the shoulders of his flannel shirt. His eyes darted from Emma to the soldiers. One of the businessmen from earlier, Brad, stood behind him in the gloom, tie-loosened shirt, untucked mouth open. He clutched his phone like a talisman. Santos's gaze finally found Emma. He started walking toward her. 2 of his team shifted automatically, forming a loose wedge around him. The nearest soldier raised an arm to push a dazed pedestrian out of the way and then stepped aside as if choreographed, leaving a straight line between Emma and the man from the helicopter. Up close, Santos looked older than his file photo would have suggested. There were lines at the corners of his eyes, a shadow of stubble along his jaw. His boots left dark, precise prints on the wet street. He stopped exactly 1 pace in front of her. Lieutenant Cole, he said. The title hit harder than the wind. Emma blinked against the rain. You have the wrong person, she replied, fighting to keep her voice neutral. I'm not a lieutenant anymore. I work at Mile High General now. He did not look away. Water ran off the brim of his helmet down the side of his neck. With respect, ma'am, Air Force Command disagrees. He reached into a waterproof pouch on his vest and pulled out a sealed brown envelope, edges taped tight. The plastic crinkled in his hand. Orders, he said. We are here for immediate extraction of Lieutenant Emma L. Cole, formerly SkyMed 3. Authorization signed by General Elaine Hart. Theater Command confirms identity by visual. I am a civilian, Emma said. The words came out thinner than she liked. Medically discharged. Psychological grounds. My commission was resigned. Your discharge is noted in the file. Santos lifted the envelope slightly. So is what you did over Kandahar. Outpost Frostline is compromised. SkyMed 6 is pinned in a whiteout. Comms and primary trauma gear are down. We lost their lead medic 6 hours ago. They requested the only person who pulled them out of a similar mess. They asked for you by name. Rain dripped from Emma's lashes. The name of the outpost lodged in her throat. That was years ago, she said. I am not cleared for field deployment. Santos's jaw flexed. For a moment, some of the formal edge slipped from his voice. Ma'am, with respect, they are not asking for cleared. They are asking for alive. Behind Emma, a car door slammed. A woman yelled to someone else to get inside. Across the street, a teenage girl held her phone higher mouth covered. Johnny's voice carried from the lantern's doorway thinner than usual. "She's a nurse," he called. "The quiet one. She just left the bar." Brad stood between Emma and the soldier's, color draining from his face. "The janitor?" he asked before he could stop himself. The nearest soldier turned his head visor, reflecting the bar's dark interior. Brad sank back a step without another word. Santos ignored them. He held the envelope out. Emma stared at it, but her hand did not move. The rain had seeped through her jacket cold along her spine. Her fingers slowly uncurled from around the ID card in her pocket. "Ma'am," Santos said softer now, only loud enough for her to hear over the helicopter. "Colonel Davies is on the ground at Frostline, stable for the moment. He was your CO on SkyMed 3. He is buying you a window with the units he has left. He thinks you are still the best chance for his people." She closed her eyes. In the dark behind her lids, the present bled into memory. The smell of burning fuel, sand turning to glass under heat, voices calling over each other on open comms, someone shouting her last name into a storm of static. "Cole, get down. Cole, get that line in now." Then the crack of artillery, the taste of dust, the sight of her own blood on gloves that should have only been covered in other people's. The first time she woke up in a hospital after that, someone had told her the official version. The convoy was hit. SkyMed 3 was scattered. Emma Cole did not make it out of the blast zone. Her squad had held a memorial in a far-off hangar helmet on a folding chair. Presumed killed in action. She opened her eyes again. Her reflection shimmered faintly in Santos's lenses, a ghost in a rain-streaked world. "Presumed dead," she said quietly. "Yes, ma'am." Santos did not flinch. 5 years on paper. Command adjusted your status an hour ago. They do not need a ghost tonight. They need their medic." Her hand rose at last. She took the envelope. The seal was already cut. Someone in the air had opened it to confirm. Inside were hard copies of her service record, lines of text she knew by heart. Emma flipped to the first page without intending to. Her photograph looked back at her. Younger, sun on her face, flight suit zipper crooked patch on her shoulder, bright and new. Below the photo in red ink that had bled slightly into the paper, a stamp read, "Status presumed KIA." A faint noise swept through the gathered crowd. Even those who did not understand the acronyms understood the shape of the letters. The camera on the teenage girl's phone caught the words in high definition. Behind Emma, she heard Brad choke on the start of a sentence. "Ma'am," he stammered. The one from the bar, she is the one who cleans the..." The word died in his mouth. Emma ran her thumb along the edge of the stamp, tracing the outline of the letters as if they might peel away into the rain. A bitter understanding slid into place. She had spent years in a city where no one really saw her. Back in a world that believed she was gone. Maybe that was why it had been so easy to vanish into quiet hallways and late shifts. To become a shadow in a place where no one expected anything from her. Santos straightened. "Lieutenant Cole," he said. The formal tone returned crisp and steady. "I am authorized to use whatever means necessary to secure your transport to Frostline. I would rather not have to pick you up off this street, so I am asking, will you come with us?" The rain softened into a fine mist again. The rotors kept turning, waiting. Emma looked past him to the open door of the Pave Hawk. The interior glowed red, the straps and seats familiar enough to make her chest ache. Her fingers tightened on the envelope, the paper going damp at the edges. She slid her other hand back into her pocket and wrapped it once more around her old ID card. The plastic was still cold. The name on it was still hers. She drew a breath that filled her lungs fully for the first time that night. "Get me a harness," she said. "And a bag. If SkyMed 6 is as bad as you say, they are going to need more than one pair of hands." The harness straps bit into Emma's shoulders as she settled onto the narrow canvas seat. The inside of the Pave Hawk glowed in red light, soft and unreal, painting every face in shades of rust and shadow. Santos reached past her and clipped her tether to the overhead line with a clean metallic click. The floor vibrated under her boots as the pilot brought the engines back up. "You remember how to do this?" Santos asked. Emma stared at the metal hook between her fingers. "I remember." He gave a short nod and moved down the line, checking his team's gear. The crew chief slapped the side of the fuselage twice. "Ghost Rider 2. One lifting the pilot's voice came through the cabin speakers. "Clear street, clear air, taking off." The helicopter rose. The city fell away in jerks, framed by the open door. For a moment, Emma saw Larimer Street from above, neon signs, flickering tiny faces, turned up phones still raised. Rain streaked sideways across the opening. Then the pilot banked, and the city swung out of view, replaced by a dark stretch of interstate lights and the faint glow at the horizon. Emma's stomach lurched, not from the movement, but from memory. She pulled the shoulder straps tighter and fixed her gaze on the opposite wall. The patch of worn fabric above the crew chief's station bore an emblem she knew intimately. A stylized set of wings around a caduceus thread, faded from repeated washings. Flight nurse insignia. Her hand rose without thinking. She touched her own shoulder where the same symbol had once been sewn onto a different flight suit, bright and stiff. Now there was only thin cotton and the ghost of stitching under her fingertips. Across from her, one of the medics watched her quietly. "You used to fly with SkyMed," he shouted over the engine noise. "Yes," Emma answered. He grinned quick and strained. "Heard stories. Did not think you were real." "Me either," she said before she could stop herself. The medic laughed once and looked away. Santos dropped back into the seat beside her. He handed her a headset. She slid it on the padding warm from someone else's use. The rotors dulled to a steady hum in her ears. "Figured you might want to hear the traffic," Santos said. Static crackled, then cleared. "Frostline to Ghost Rider, 2-1 How, copy," a voice said, distant and thin with interference. "Ghost Rider, 2-1 copies," the pilot replied. "ETA 23 minutes. Confirm LZ status." "LZ is a mess. Snow and crosswinds. You will have ground flares and one lunatic with batons. That is us." Voices in the cabin chuckled. Emma did not. "What is their casualty count now?" she asked. Santos lifted his hand to his mic. "Frostline, this is Santos. Send most recent triage numbers." There was a pause and a burst of static that sounded like the air itself tearing. Then the answer came. 6 red, 4 yellow, more green rolling in from outer perimeter. Med tint, losing heat. Power fluctuates. Lead medic, KIA. Surgeon on site is Alan Mercer. He is about ready to start chewing through the tent poles. Emma closed her eyes briefly. Mercer. She had seen his name in journals. Trauma surgeon, fast hands, faster temper. "Any word from Colonel Davies?" she asked. Santos studied her profile for a moment. "Still conscious last we heard," he said. "He refuses evac until his people are stable." Of course he did. The pilot's voice came in again, more clipped now, crossing into the worst of it. "Buckle in for some fun." The helicopter lurched as it hit rough air. The red light swung on its cable. Emma's stomach dropped, then settled. Her right hand slid into her pocket again. She pulled out the ID card at last. In the dim cabin, her own picture looked like a stranger's. Same eyes, less shadow. She flipped it over. On the back in smudged ink, a name was scrawled. Harris. The pen had dug into the plastic. She had written it while sitting on a ramp, once hands still stained with someone else's blood, making a list of who had made it onto the bird. She slid the card back into her pocket and looked down at her hand. In the ER, they had seemed too big, too clumsy, always in the wrong place. Here, under the red light, they looked like they had that night on the tarmac. Scar along her thumb. Small white line on the back of her hand where a scalpel had slipped. Hands that remembered. She flexed her fingers slowly. They did not shake. Outside, the darkness thickened. The faint glow of the city fell away until there was only blackness and the occasional flicker from lightning too far away to hear. "Visual on Frostline," the pilot said at last. "Somebody down there owes me a drink." Emma leaned toward the open door. At first, she saw nothing. Then the world below resolved into shapes. A slash of pale runway bathed in weak floodlights. Structures hunched against the wind, half buried in snowdrifts. 2 lines of orange flares marked a makeshift landing zone. A solitary figure in a heavy parka stood between the flares' arms, held up wands in each hand, guiding them down. Snow whipped around his legs. The wind hit them sideways on approach. The helicopter rocked. The flares below danced. For a breath, Emma thought they would abort and circle. The pilot forced the nose against the gust. The skids kissed the ground hard. "Welcome to Frostline," someone muttered. The door gunner slid the side open. Cold rushed in like a living thing. It bit at Emma's cheeks, stabbed needles into her lungs. The air smelled of jet fuel, snow, and something metallic underneath. "On me," Santos shouted. "Stay tight." Emma unclipped her harness. Her fingers remembered the motion without hesitation. She grabbed the strap of a medical pack that had been stowed by the door and slung it over one shoulder. The world shrank to what she could see between her eyelashes as the snow blasted sideways. The ground was uneven under her boots. Ice hid beneath the churned top layer. The man with the wands jogged toward them, goggles slick with frost. "Med tent is that way," he yelled, pointing. "Follow the footprints, not the lights. The lights are for show. The snow does not care." Emma almost smiled. Her lips were too cold for it to fully form. They pushed through the gale toward a cluster of tents encased in layered canvas. Light leaked around the zippers in thin yellow lines. The flap to the largest tent snapped and flapped like a living thing. Inside, the air was 10 degrees warmer and stale. The tent smelled of sweat, antiseptic, and wet wool. A generator coughed intermittently in the corner, causing the lights to flicker. Voices overlapped in a steady stream. Someone called for more gauze. Another demanded vitals. A third swore under his breath without pause as he worked. Cots filled the narrow aisles. On one, a man with a leg twisted in a direction it should not go, bit down on a piece of leather. On another, a young woman blinked through a mask of soot eyes unfocused. At the center of it all, hunched over a cluttered table, was Dr. Alan Mercer. His sleeves were rolled to his elbows. Blood stained his forearms to mid-length. His hair stuck to his forehead in damp curls. He snapped his head up as Emma entered as if he had felt a change in air pressure. "Who the hell are you?" he demanded. Santos stepped forward. "Captain Miguel Santos, sir. Flight team. This is Lieutenant Emma Cole. She is here on request from Colonel Davies in Air Force Command." Mercer's eyes flicked over Emma, taking in the thin jacket. Instead of a proper field coat, the lack of rank pins, the hospital scrub pants peeking from under borrowed snow gear. "I asked for more hands," he said, "not a tourist." He pointed to a cot behind him. "You." His voice cracked, but the command in it was solid. "You want to help? Fine. Hold pressure here." Emma moved around him. The patient on the cot was pale, lips almost white. Sweat beaded on his forehead despite the cold. The bandage over his left flank was soaked through dark crimson. A blood pressure cuff hung deflated at his elbow. Her gaze dropped to the name tape on his torn uniform. Briggs Inn. The letters blurred for a second. She blinked hard. She had last seen Noah Briggs half leaning against a bulkhead, grinning through pain, insisting he could walk off a shrapnel wound with enough coffee. He had been 23. Now his hair was longer, his jaw sharper. The scar across his chest, barely visible above the bandage, curved in a line she recognized as if she had drawn it yesterday. "Pressure is useless there," she said quietly. Her hand found the edge of the saturated pad anyway, her palms pressing down with practiced force. "He is filling his own chest with blood." Mercer whipped his head around. "You do not call my interventions useless in my tent," he snapped. "You are out of uniform, out of line, and out of time if you keep talking instead of doing." Emma met his glare. "His trachea is deviating," she said. "He has a tension pneumothorax on the left. What you are seeing as flank bleed is just what can escape. The rest is trapped." He made his way as auto-transfusing into the wrong cavity. The room noise dimmed a fraction as nearby medics glanced over. Mercer stepped around the cot, leaning in to look. His fingers probed Briggs's neck, tracing the subtle shift of the airway. His expression tightened. "Our chest tube is toast," he muttered. "We do not have a replacement. Generator killed suction twice. I have been trying to keep him alive long enough to throw him on the next bird out." "There is no next bird if your LZ keeps blowing sideways," Santos called from near the entrance. Mercer swore under his breath. Emma took a breath, letting the cold air in the tent slide down into her lungs and settle there. Her hands did not leave Briggs's side. "Doctor," she said. "I know the scar tissue in his chest. I put most of it there. Shrapnel lower left 5 years ago. We used an improvised water seal drain when our equipment died in Kandahar. It will work here." Mercer stared at her. "You are telling me you are the medic from that after-action report, the one they turned into a training scenario that made half my residents throw up?" "Yes. And you want me to let you poke a hole in my patient with a field kit held together by tape and hope?" "I want you to let me give him a chance to breathe," Emma said. She did not raise her voice. She did not have to. Every syllable sat solid in the space between them. Mercer's jaw belonged to someone who was not used to stepping back. He looked at Briggs's face, at the shallow, uneven rise of his chest, at the faint flutter of eyelids that did not quite open. "How long?" he asked. Emma did not look at the monitor. She did not need the failing numbers there. "Less than a minute before he arrests," she said. "Maybe less than 30 seconds. Mercer closed his eyes for half a breath. When he opened them again, some of the fight had drained out, leaving only exhaustion. "What do you need?" he asked. "A 14-gauge needle tubing, a bottle of sterile water, and someone who can follow directions without arguing." Stark, Mercer barked, turning. "Get her what she wants. Dean with her, not against her. The rest of you keep doing what you are doing. We stop for no one." A medic sprinted to the supply shelf, hands digging through open boxes. Another dragged a rolling tray closer, knocking aside empty syringes and bloody gauze. Emma eased back the soaked bandage just enough to see the edge of the sutured scar that ran across Briggs's side. Her fingers mapped the anatomy beneath. The needle felt light in her hand. She connected the tubing, checked the connection, and thrust the other end into the bottle of sterile water until it was submerged. "Hold that level with his chest," she said to the medic at her elbow. She cleaned a small patch of skin with the last of an alcohol swab, then slid the needle between ribs, careful and swift. There was resistance, then a sudden give, a soft pop that she felt more than heard. A hiss of air rushed out through the tubing. Bubbles rose in the water bottle in a steady stream. Briggs's chest, which had been barely moving, lifted more freely on the next breath. The monitor by his head squealed and then settled into a stronger rhythm. Dean let out a breath that sounded like a sob. Mercer stared at the improvised drain. The muscles around his mouth relaxed a fraction. Emma did not pause to enjoy it. Rotate 2 units of O negative to bed 3, she called. He is younger and closer to decompensating. Pull warming blankets from anyone green tagged and get them on the burn patient by the entrance. You, she pointed at a medic standing frozen with a clipboard, you are now flow. No one touches blood or oxygen without clearing it through you. The medic gulped and nodded. Orders snapped out of her in clean lines. People moved, supplies shifted. The tense chaos reassembled itself around a new center of gravity. Santos watched from near the door, snow still melting off his shoulders. Emma's hands were covered in blood again. This time the sight steadied her. In this frigid, flickering tent with the wind howling outside and the generator coughing in protest, the rhythm of the place began to change. The storm did not stop. It raged and clawed at the canvas, but inside the medical tent something had shifted. Voices were still sharp, orders still clipped, but the ragged edge of panic had bled away. Gauze moved where it needed to go. Blood bags changed hands with purpose. Oxygen lines were rerouted before anyone had to ask. Emma moved through the narrow aisle with a bottle of saline wedged under one arm and a folded blanket over the other. Her shoulders brushed hanging IV tubing. Her boots slipped once on a patch of melted snow, then found traction again. At Briggs's cot, the improvised water seal still burbled quietly. His skin was less gray now, lips a faint pink instead of white. On the next bed over, a corporal with a shattered femur drifted in and out of sleep, his legs stabilized. Mercer stood across from Emma at a different cot, suturing a head wound by lantern light, while the overhead bulbs hiccuped. His hands did not pause when she stepped nearby, but his eyes flicked up to track her before returning to his work. "How is he holding?" Emma asked, nodding toward Briggs. "Better than I am," Mercer answered. The corner of his mouth twitched. "Pressure is up. Lung is re-expanding. Whatever you did is buying me time I did not have." "You bought it first," she said. "You kept him alive long enough to get the air out." He snorted softly. "Flatter me again and I will forget to be offended that you walked into my tent and rewrote my triage in 15 minutes. "You let me," she replied. He pulled the last stitch through and bit off the excess. "I did not say I regretted it." A gust of wind hit the side of the tent. The generator coughed, sputtered twice, then caught again. The bulbs flickered but stayed lit. Someone near the entrance straightened and lifted a hand in reflexive salute. "General on deck," a sergeant called. Conversation stuttered, then lowered. No one stopped working, but movements adjusted, more deliberate. General Elaine Hart stepped through the flap. Snow clung to the shoulders of her dark coat, melting into dark patches. Her hat was tucked under one arm. Wind had pulled strands of gray from her tight bun. She paused inside the entrance, letting her eyes adjust from white out to dim yellow. The lines around her mouth were deep, but there was nothing soft in her posture. Mercer wiped his hands on an already stained towel and stepped forward. "Ma'am," he said, "we are holding for the moment." "I can see that," Hart replied. Her gaze traveled along the rows of cots over the water seal rig, across the hurried choreography of medics and nurses. "Status of criticals." "Stabilized," Mercer said. He seemed to taste the word as if it was new in his mouth. "For now." "I lost my lead medic. I thought I was going to lose more." Hart's eyes landed on Briggs. The tubing, the makeshift setup on the chair beside his cot, the bottle at his bedside bubbling faintly. Her gaze followed the line of the needle into his chest, then tracked up the length of the arm that held the tube steady. Emma did not have to move for Hart to see her. She had ended up at the center of the tent without trying. Hart walked toward her. Each step was measured, not slowed by the mud on the floor or the stray pieces of equipment in her path. "Lieutenant Emma Cole," she said. There was no question in it. Emma straightened. Her hand twitched toward a salute, then stopped, halfway unsure of the right protocol for someone who had been declared dead on paper. Hart did not hesitate. She drew herself up and snapped a crisp salute, first palm-flat eyes locked on Emma's. "Ma'am," she said, "on behalf of every name on the manifest at Frostline tonight, welcome back." The tent went quieter. Someone dropped a clamp. It clinked against metal, and no one looked away from the center of the aisle. Emma felt the old reflex rise from somewhere deeper than training. Her arm came up, shoulder-rolling into the familiar angle. She returned the salute with a hand that did not tremble. "Thank you, General," she said. Hart's gaze softened by the smallest degree. "I read your file on the way here," Hart told her. "The declassified version does not do you justice." "It does enough," Emma answered. She let her arm fall back to her side. "Apparently not," Hart said. "My understanding is that my trauma tent was losing patients until about 20 minutes ago. Now I walk in and half of them are moving air again, some with equipment that is older than the soldiers on the cots." Mercer cleared his throat. "She walked in and took over without asking," he said. "I let her." "Says something about both of us." Hart glanced at him. "It says you know when to hand the knife to someone with steadier hands," she said. "That is not a failing doctor. That is survival." Her eyes returned to Emma. "One of my comm techs recorded your arrival," Hart said. They caught the drain placement by accident. I normally yell at people for filming in my med tent. This time I'm thinking of making an exception. Emma frowned slightly. Recording in the tent is not necessary. Maybe not, Hart said. But you have a squad back home that thinks you stopped breathing 5 years ago. They may benefit from seeing you do it very much alive. A medic near the generator shifted awkwardly, guilt written on his face. Emma realized he was the one still holding his phone in a gloved hand, the screen face down on a crate. Hart extended her hand. Whatever name they have been using for you, she said. Here you are more than a ghost story. You charged into a storm you did not owe and dragged people back from the edge. That counts for something. Emma took the hand. Hart's grip was firm grounding. The generator steadied. The lights stopped flickering. Outside, the storm screamed and clawed at the canvas. Inside, someone began humming under their breath, a tuneless sound that threaded through the low talk and the beeps. Santos leaned back against a support pole near the entrance, eyes tracking the exchange. His shoulders eased for the first time since they had landed. By the time the next rotation of medics arrived from the perimeter, Briggs was sleeping without gasping, the burn patient at the entrance had stopped shaking, and the corporal with the smashed leg was snoring softly around a nasal cannula. A few hours later, when the airfield was marginally calmer and the storm notation had shifted from urgent to severe on the operations board, Ghost Rider 2-1 lifted again. Emma watched from the edge of the pad as the Pavehawk rose into the blowing snow, a dark shape against the pale blur. Its tail light winked once, then vanished. Stark, the medic who had held the water bottle level, stood beside her. They are going to talk about that drain for a long time, he said. They can talk about all of it, Santos added, stepping up on her other side. Command asked for a full report, with footage. Emma absorbed this in silence. The wind bit at the edges of her hood. The taste of jet exhaust mixed with snow on the back of her tongue. Footage, she repeated. Santos nodded. General Hart is not the type to waste a good story, he said. Apparently there is morale value in watching a presumed dead lieutenant tell a storm to sit down. Emma almost laughed. The sound came out as a short puff of air. She did not see the video leave the base. It started in a war room where someone plugged a cable into a laptop and loaded the file for internal review. The image of her walking into the tent, hair-damp jacket too thin, played on a screen meant for topographical maps. From there, it hopped to a secure drive, then to a private account, then to a small group chat of people who had once worn the same patch she still kept in her pocket. One of them sent it to a sibling who happened to be sitting in a newsroom in Denver. By the time an hour had passed, the clip had a title. Ghost Nurse Returns Presumed KIA Flight Medic Saves Unit in Arctic Storm. A local station ran it on a loop in the corner of their late afternoon broadcast. Someone cut in footage from Larimer Street, grainy cell phone video of the Pavehawk parked between sedans, rain bouncing off the tarmac. They froze a frame of Emma standing in the rotor wash hair-whipping envelope in hand. In the lantern, the television above the bar flickered back to life after an electrician coaxed the wiring into cooperation. The sound was low as usual. Johnny was wiping down the counter when he glanced up. He almost dropped the glass he was holding. On the screen, Emma's face filled the left side in a box marked Live from Outpost Frostline. In the background of the shot, a medic rushed past with a bag of fluids. On the right, the Larimer Street footage showed her in the rain, surrounded by armed soldiers. Text at the bottom crawled by, identified as First Lieutenant Emma L. Cole, USAF, previously listed as presumed killed in action. Johnny moved closer to the screen without realizing it. His rag slid from his hand to the floor. Behind him, at the same table that had been loud the night before, Brad Calloway sat rigid. His drink was untouched. His phone was already buzzing on the table with new notifications. On screen, someone froze a frame that focused on the water seal drain, on Emma's blood-stained hands, on the moment General Hart saluted her in the tent. A commentator's voice overlaid the images. Sources at Mile High General Hospital confirm that Lieutenant Cole has been working there under the radar as a night shift nurse. Records list her as a trainee despite her decorated service record. Questions are being raised about how such a discrepancy went unnoticed. Brad's phone buzzed again. A message preview flashed. Is this the nurse you insulted last night? At Mile High. General, the hospital lobby televisions all showed the same clip. Patients in chairs watched with varying levels of interest. Some pointed. A few of the night shift nurses drinking morning coffee in the staff lounge froze mid-sip. In his office, Dr. Randall Pike sat at his desk with Emma's military file filling his screen. Someone from the board had pushed it to him with a brief note. We need to talk. Commendations scrolled past his eyes. Mission names, injury reports, the line in capital letters near the bottom. Status presumed Kaye. He remembered her standing in the supply closet, absorbing his anger without raising her voice. He heard again the way she had said she would have coded as if stating the weather. On the television in the corner of his office, the commentator repeated the phrase, Quiet hero 3 times. Pike muted it. He pressed his palms to his eyes until tiny fireworks danced against the darkness. I am the one who panicked, he said under his breath, not her. The hospital board called an emergency meeting. Questions came fast, layered with legal language and public relations concerns. Why had her file been marked as junior staff? Who had known? Who had ignored? By late afternoon, the storm at Frostline had calmed enough for transport, and Emma found herself on another aircraft, this time headed south. The ride down felt longer, though she slept through most of it in broken stretches. When she walked back into Mile High General through the staff entrance the next morning, the air smelled of disinfectant and coffee just as it always did. The difference lay in the silence. No one spoke when they saw her. They did not have to. They were already standing in 2 lines down the main hallway, shoulders almost touching faces turned toward the door. Doctors in white coats, residents in wrinkled scrubs, nurses who had joked about her quiet, techs who had passed her in the hall 100 times without remembering her name. As Emma stepped inside, the lines straightened as if pulled tight. The only sound was the distant beeping of monitors and the soft squeak of her soles on the polished floor. At the far end of the corridor near the nurses' station, Dr. Randall Pike stood with a folder in his hands. The pages inside shook once, then stilled. He took a step forward to meet her. For a moment, no one moved. Emma stood just inside the corridor, the hospital's fluorescent lights washing the color from everything. On either side of her, the lines of staff formed a narrow path to the nurses' station. It reminded her of a runway, the kind she had watched from the back of a plane. Her fingers tightened around the strap of the duffel bag on her shoulder. The bag held her spare scrubs, a book she had been meaning to finish, and her hospital badge. It felt heavier than any field kit. Dr. Randall Pike broke the stillness. He walked toward her, each step sounding louder than it should have on the polished floor. The folder in his hand bore the Air Force seal on the front. The pages inside were slightly curled at the edges, as if he had gripped them hard. When he stopped a few feet away, Emma could see that his tie was crooked. There was stubble along his jaw, as if he had not slept much. "Lieutenant Cole," he said. He looked as if the title scraped his throat on the way out. "Emma," she answered, "we are not on base." A faint, humorless breath left his lungs. He lifted the folder a little. "I have been reading," he said. "Your file. The reports from Kandahar. From the other deployments, the commendations. The line that says we held a memorial for you in a hangar while you were lying in a hospital bed somewhere else." Her gaze dropped briefly to the folder, then back to his face. "Someone made a mistake on a form," she said. "It happens." "No," he replied. His voice cracked, then steadied. "What happened here was not a mistake on a form. It was me, and people like me." The hallway remained silent. The staff listened without pretending not to. Pike swallowed. "I saw a quiet nurse," he said. "I saw someone who never fought back. Someone who did not argue with me. I decided that meant you were lesser. So I put you in a box in my mind and left you there. Even when you were telling me things I needed to hear." His knuckles whitened around the folder. "You saved that woman with the EpiPen," he went on. "You saw it before I did. I yelled at you in a closet as if you had put her at risk, not pulled her out of it. If she had died, that would have been on me. I punished you because you reminded me of that." Emma watched his eyes. There was no deflection in them now, no superiority, only the raw edge of someone looking at their own reflection without filters. "I owe you an apology," he said. "Not the kind you mumble in a hallway and forget. A real one. I was arrogant. I was careless. I let your silence convince me you had nothing to say. I was not worthy of being your superior." Words hung there heavier than the air. Emma let them sit for a heartbeat, then two. She could have told him that it was fine, that she was used to it, that it did not matter now. None of those statements would have been true. She shifted the duffel higher on her shoulder. "Dr. Pike," she said, "I do not need your apology." His expression tightened as if he had expected that sting. But she continued and looked past him. At the edges of the hallway behind the attendings and the senior nurses, a line of younger faces waited. A first-year resident with dark circles under her eyes. A new nurse still wearing a temporary name tag. A tech who still flinched when the trauma pager went off. "They do," Emma said. The younger staff straightened under her gaze. "Every new nurse who walks through that door," she said, "every intern who is terrified of saying the wrong thing, they need you to be different. They need you to look past volume and confidence, to see the ones who are quiet and know that quiet is not empty." Her voice stayed calm. The words had weight because they were simple. When a patient is dying, she went on the rank, on someone's badge matters less than what they can do with their hands. If a junior sees something you miss, you need them to speak up. You need to listen. She let out a breath she had not realized she was holding. "I am leaving this place," she said. "I can walk away from the way you treated me." "They cannot. They are still here. Change that for them, not for me." Pike's throat worked. He nodded once, twice. You have my word, he said, not as a promise, as an obligation. Behind him, the chief administrator cleared her throat. We have already begun, the administrator said. The board met last night. In light of your history and what you did at Frostline, we reviewed every code situation from the last year. Emma did not ask what they had found. The faces in the hall answered for her. We are instituting new guidelines, the administrator continued. Dr. Pike has drafted them. They require approval, but given recent events, I do not expect resistance. Pike lifted his chin slightly. We are calling it the Cole Protocol, he said. In code situations, triage decisions will prioritize patient status over hierarchy. Junior staff will be trained to challenge orders that endanger a patient. Not politely, not if they feel like it, but as a duty. If a nurse or resident overrides me to save a life, the burden of proof will be on my decision, not their courage. Emma glanced at him. You do not need my name on it, she said. I do, he replied. And so do they. They need a precedent that says someone did it first and was right. He hesitated, then added, If you object, we can call it something else. The principle will not change. Emma thought of a tent in a snowstorm, of an exhausted surgeon stepping back from a cot, of medics looking at her not as an intruder, but as someone to follow. She shook her head. The name is not the important part, she said. What you do with it is. Pike nodded. A young nurse stepped out of the line. It was the one who had once laughed in the break room about Emma never talking, who had rolled her eyes when Emma double-checked dosages. Now her eyes shone for a different reason. Emma, she said. Her voice wavered, then steadied. Your quiet was louder than all our noise. I'm sorry I did not see it. Thank you for showing us how to be better at this. Emma felt something ease in her chest. She shifted the duffel one more time, then slipped the lanyard of her hospital badge from around her neck. The plastic rectangle swung once in the air before she caught it. The badge had her photograph on it. The same neutral expression she gave to cameras, the one that revealed nothing. She walked past Pike, past the administrator, down the hallway lined with staff. No one tried to touch her. A few nodded. Someone whispered ma'am under their breath and looked startled at themselves. At the main desk, she set the badge gently on the counter. The clerk behind the desk looked rattled, as if she had not expected to be part of this day at all. Thank you, Emma said to her, for always getting my logins fixed. The clerk blinked, then smiled, small and surprised. Emma turned and walked back down the corridor. As she passed, people stepped slightly aside, not out of avoidance this time, but as if making sure she had enough space. By the time she reached the exit, the hallway felt lighter. The weight that had pressed on her shoulders for years loosened. Outside daylight hit her face. It was cold and bright. The hospital's glass front reflected a woman in a dark jacket with a duffel bag, not a rank or a file. She crossed the parking lot to the bus stop. The bench was metal unforgiving, but the familiarity of it was almost comforting. Traffic roared past on the avenue. A child's laughter floated from somewhere down the sidewalk. Her apartment felt even smaller than usual when she opened the door. A couch, a coffee table, a narrow shelf of medical textbooks, a lamp. That was most of her living room. The air had the faint scent of old coffee and fabric softener. She set the duffel down by the door and shrugged out of her jacket. For the first time since Frostline, she was truly alone. On the kitchen counter beneath a stack of junk mail and a grocery flyer lay a cream-colored envelope with an embossed seal. She had found it that morning before leaving for the hospital, but had not opened it. The weight of the badge in her pocket had been enough to deal with at once. Now with the badge gone, the envelope was the only thing left that made her palms feel damp. She picked it up. The paper was thick, the kind used for ceremonies and official regrets. Her name was written in careful black ink on the front. Emma slid a thumb under the flap and tore it open. Inside was a letter on heavy stationery. The header bore the crest of the Department of the Air Force. Her eyes moved down the page. Lieutenant Emma L. Cole, it began, then corrected in parentheses, status updated to active pending acceptance of assignment. The letter did not apologize for the years she had been listed as dead. It did not mention quiet shifts in civilian hospitals or water glasses in bars. It spoke in the plain language of orders and offers. She was requested to accept a position as Chief Tactical Medical Instructor, working with flight medics and trauma teams. The role carried with it a field-recognized promotion to the enlisted rank used in the program Gunnery Sergeant for training purposes. It came with housing on base if desired, access to simulators, authority to write and revise protocols. At the bottom, General Hart's signature cut across the page in a neat, decisive line. Emma read it twice, then a third time. Her apartment hummed around her. The refrigerator motor kicked on. Pipes clanged somewhere in the wall. A car alarm yelped and silenced itself down on the street. She looked around the room. On the end table by the couch, her old SkyMed patch lay in a shallow dish. She had pulled it from the lining of her jacket a month after she had left the service, the torn thread still attached, and dropped it there. For years, it had been just another object gathering dust. She picked it up now. The fabric felt softer from age. The design was slightly faded but still visible, wings around a staff the hint of a star. Her thumb followed the jagged line where it had ripped. This patch had been part of a uniform they had folded and set next to a helmet at a memorial she had not attended. It had been a symbol of someone who no longer existed on paper. In her other hand, the letter waited. She set the patch down beside it and stepped back, seeing them both together side by side on the table. Her hands rested on the back of the couch. She realized they were not shaking. This room had been her hiding place, a place to come back to at dawn and collapse onto the couch, letting the television fill the air with someone else's noise. A place where no one asked anything of her. It also felt suddenly too small. She picked up the patch again. It lay neatly over the letterhead, covering the printed words for a moment, then revealing them as she moved it. She found a pen and signed her name at the bottom of the page under hearts. Emma L. Cole. The letters flowed easier than when she signed discharge papers years before. They felt less like an ending and more like a beginning that belonged to her. She folded the letter back into its envelope, tucking the patch inside with it. The paper crinkled softly as it settled. Her hands lingered on the flap. For the first time, the idea of returning to a hangar did not send her heart racing in panic. It brought a different sensation, one that felt a little like purpose and a little like relief. The rotors would be loud, the storms would still come, people would bleed. She would be asking a lot of herself again. She looked down at her fingers at the small scars, the faint trace of dried skin where antiseptic had stripped away natural oils over years. "These hands are not done," she said quietly. The empty room did not answer, but the words settled comfortably in the space between the walls. She placed the envelope on the table with more care than she had used for anything in that apartment in a long time. The sky above the base was a clear, hard blue when Emma stepped off the transport. Heat rolled off the runway in slow waves. The air smelled of jet fuel, hot metal, and sun-baked concrete. In the distance, a line of helicopters sat in a neat row, rotors still like animals resting between runs. Her new flight suit fit better than she expected. The fabric was stiff in places, soft in others, with the particular weight she remembered. On her left shoulder, a SkyMed patch had been sewn on. The edges showed the faintest hint of the old tear stitched over with a stronger thread. She adjusted the strap of the dented medical bag in her hand. It was the same one she had carried years before the canvas, worn the seams revised more times than she could count. The zipper still stuck halfway if she pulled it too fast. "Gunny Cole." The voice came from near the hangar doors. Staff Sergeant Noah Briggs walked toward her with a measured gait. His left leg no longer dragged, but there was a subtle unevenness in his steps. A small scar at his hairline disappeared into his hair. He stopped in front of her and snapped a salute. His face broke into a wide, genuine smile. "You saved my life twice," he said. "Once on a runway in a desert, once in a snowstorm. I figured I should walk the third time on my own." She returned the salute, then let her hand drop. "You are doing a convincing job," she said. He laughed, the sound quick and relieved. "The candidates are inside," he told her. 50 of them. Half think they know everything. The other half are terrified. You know, typical." She followed him into the hangar. The space swallowed them. The high ceiling was crisscrossed with metal beams and cables. Light filtered in from high windows, picking up dust motes and the faint haze of engine exhaust. On the polished concrete floor in 3 neat rows stood 50 trainees, flight suits fresh from supply, boots still too clean, patches bare waiting for designations. Some shifted their weight from foot to foot. Others held themselves rigid as if stiffness could hide nerves. Their eyes tracked Emma as she walked to the front. Briggs moved to the side, leaving her alone in the open space facing the rows. Emma set the old medical bag on a waist-high table. The gesture was careful, almost ceremonial. The bag sagged a little, the canvas giving in to gravity. She unzipped it and pulled out a few items, laying them on the table. An EpiPen still in its plastic sheath. A length of clear tubing coiled in a loop. A small battered bottle that had once held sterile water, now empty and cleaned. The torn SkyMed patch that had been stitched and restitched, edges frayed but intact. The trainees shifted curiosity, tightening their attention. Emma rested her hands on either side of the table. Then she looked up at the faces in front of her. "These are tools," she said. "Simple ones. Nothing special on their own. You have seen them before. You will see them again." Her gaze moved down the first row, pausing on a young woman whose jaw was clenched on a lanky man whose fingers twitched near his pockets. She lifted her hands, palms up, fingers slightly spread. "These," she said, "are the only tools that really matter." Silence settled over the hangar. Even the distant noise of an engine test outside seemed to soften. I have been told, Emma continued, that my hands are too quiet, too hesitant, not loud enough in a room full of voices, in a hospital that can look like weakness. In a storm, it is the difference between noise and focus. She turned her hands slightly, showing the small white scars. These hands have held a man's life, while his heart stopped arguing with me, she said. They have put steel into places it did not belong so air could get where it needed to go. They have pushed a pen into paper to sign discharge papers that said I was done. Today they signed something else. She let that rest there. In a crisis, she said, your rank is not what is on your collar. It is what you can do when someone on a cot in front of you is running out of blood or air. It is the training you have burned into your muscles and your reflexes. It is whether you open your mouth when you see something no one else sees. A few of the trainees glanced sideways as if weighing which type they were. Emma's eyes found one in the second row, a quiet young man with his gaze fixed on the floor. You in the second row, she said. Look up? He did. His eyes were wide, caught between embarrassment and surprise. You do not have to shout to matter, she told him. You do have to speak when it counts. The hangar door at the far end began to roll open with a low mechanical rumble. Sunlight poured in, cutting a bright line across the floor. General Hart walked in, flanked by 2 officers. She did not come to the front. She stopped at the edge of the assembled group, hands clasped behind her back, and listened. Emma glanced her way once, then back to the trainees. You are here because someone saw something in you, she said. Brains, hands, willingness to step towards the danger instead of away from it. That is good. It is not enough. She let her hands fall to her sides. When the room goes quiet, she said, and everyone is looking at the monitor instead of the patient, you need to be the one who notices the color of their lips. When someone higher ranked than you calls it a panic attack, and you see an airway closing, you need to be the one who reaches for the epinephrine. The words left her evenly, but somewhere in her chest an old knot loosened. On this base, Hart's voice called out, carrying easily across the space, that expectation will not be left hanging in the air. The trainee straightened as Hart walked forward to stand beside Emma. From this day on, Hart said, every medic, nurse, and flight crew under my command will train under what we are formally naming the Cole Rule. She paused long enough to let the phrase sink in. In simple terms, Hart said it means this. When a life is at stake, competence outranks comfort. If you are the person in the room who knows what needs to be done to keep a heart beating or lungs moving, you do not wait for permission. You speak, you act, you own the outcome, and your chain of command will stand behind you when you do. She looked at Emma. Lieutenant Cole has already shown us what that looks like, Hart said. Your job is to learn it, repeat it, and then teach it to the ones who come after you. Hart stepped back, giving the space to Emma again. For a moment, no one spoke. The air in the hangar held a new kind of weight, not the heaviness of dread, but the density of something shared. Emma picked up the patched Sky Med emblem and turned it over in her hand. This used to be just a piece of fabric, she said, a way to say which aircraft I rode in and who I rode with. They once folded a uniform with this on the shoulder and told people I was gone. She closed her fingers around it, then opened them again. It is not a memorial anymore, she said. It is a reminder. Not that I almost died, but that we do not leave our own behind. Not on the ground, not in a tent, not in a hospital hallway somewhere 1,000 miles away. Briggs stood a little straighter at the edge of her vision. Emma set the patch down on the table beside the old tools and the new ones. Look at your hands, she said. 50 pairs of hands, lifted, some calloused, some still smooth. Everything you are training for is going to run through them, she said. Do not let anyone convince you they are not enough. Train them until they are, then trust them. Outside, somewhere beyond the hangar, a helicopter engine spun up. The first low thump of rotor blades reached them, a familiar pulse in the air. Emma turned her head toward the sound. It no longer brought sand and fire to mind. It carried the image of snow hitting canvas of gauge needles, stabilizing of a bar on Larimer Street, where a bartender looked up at a television and saw someone he thought he knew become someone else. She looked back at the trainees. All right, she said. Let us get to work. The rotor noise grew louder, filling the hangar like a heartbeat. Emma's voice cut cleanly through it as she began to outline the first scenario, her hands moving as she spoke, already teaching the movements that would one day keep someone else alive. Thank you so much for listening to today's story. If this story resonated with you or made you reflect, I'd love to hear your thoughts, so feel free to share them in the comments below, and don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell so you won't miss the next story.